Great. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. A recording and/or broadcast of this meeting is being made at the direction of the board, and the recording and/or broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. I will now do roll call. Jessica Spicer.
Here.
Vladimir Ivanovic.
Here.
Brian Johnson.
Here.
Steve Taglio.
Here.
Great. I too am here. Okay. Would any board members like to provide comment on tonight's agenda? Okay. Then may I please have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Vladimir. Can I please have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Jessica. Motion to approve tonight's agenda was made by Vladimir and seconded by Jessica. I will do a roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Vladimir?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. All right, on to our first and only agenda item, school reopening update. Mr. Baer.
Yeah, I'll give a brief introduction and then hand off to Sandra to walk through some information. We've met many times talking about the reopening of our schools. The board had requested an update on student progress, as well as plans for summer school and or remediation where necessary. So we wanted to bring that to you this evening in a special board meeting. Though we're talking about student performance, I just want to update the board on a couple of things. As you know, educators were finally moved up far enough, for the threshold was dropped down far enough to include educators in vaccinations starting yesterday officially. So we're pleased with that. We have more opportunities coming online each day, so that's a positive for sure. Also, we continue to work to understand how we can bring more students back onto campus more frequently in our K-6 campuses, and our 7th and 8th grade are poised to return students to campus beginning next week in 7th grade and the following week in 8th grade. We are still under guidance. Obviously, although the numbers have improved significantly, we're still under guidance from the county and state public health departments, I'll remind you, with regard to those requirements that we have to adhere to, be it mask wearing or ventilation or distancing. We still have a number of those we have to follow, and we continue to work with our county health departments and even the state level, wanting to make sure that we are voicing our concerns about the return of students to campus, because it is our goal, it will continue to be our goal, to have students back on campus 5 days a week. That's the end game here. But until we can do that, we want to make sure we're doing the best we possibly can for our students with everything we can right now. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Sandra to walk us through some interesting information. Sandra?
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm excited to be here tonight to talk about student progress. And if you had a chance to look through the slide deck, I'm sure you noticed that really the focus for this presentation is on K-5 students. As we talked with Jeff about doing a board study session or an update for the board, I took some time to look at what data we have, because you'll see one of the challenges of working in the pandemic is a bit of a lack of data. So instead of doing a little bit of data across the board, I really did choose to focus on K-5 and tried to go into some depth and understand that more looking needs to happen. I thought tonight I would kind of go through some of the information in chunks and stop and pause for discussion, questions, whatever from the board. So if you want to kind of save your comments for that natural pause time, I think would be helpful. And before going on to the next slide, I have to give a huge shout out to Kim Albright, who is our data specialist. She was incredibly accommodating with my text messaging and how do I find this? And do you think we could find that? And she was just really fantastic, along with Greg Drummond, who helped me find some historical data as well. So you may, well, I know you all realize Beth Leach, who is typically a coordinator in my office, who is our data and assessment coordinator focused person, has been serving as our virtual school principal. So one less body makes a little bit more work for everybody and slows us down just a little bit. But I am very excited tonight to talk to you about just some things that we've discovered as we've gone through and looked closely at our data. Next slide, Marcy. So I thought it would be really important to just start, kind of remind us about why we're here working with students, pandemic or no pandemic. We want a really high quality education for our students. And this is our vision, our portrait of a learner. And as I was putting this slide deck together, this kind of made me kind of pause a little bit. These are the skills that I've been using to survive throughout this pandemic and to get my work done. So these are the skills that we want to build with intention for our students through the pandemic, post-pandemic, and when school gets back to a more normal 5 days a week experience as well. But I just wanted to keep this front and center in our minds. Next slide. So before diving deeply into the data, I really did want to talk about challenges. And there are, I'm certain, more challenges than these challenges, but these are the ones that have really risen to the top as we talk with teachers, as we've talked with families. And I'll just want to talk about each of them. I do absolutely have to give a shout out to our tech department. So Bao and Kim, and then our tech specialists have really helped us overcome a lot of access challenges. You know, we purchased many Chromebooks and hotspots, and those have been deployed by an army of people supporting students to make sure that everybody has access. But it's even more than access. If you watch the Golden Globes last night, like there is just constant tech failures. It just happens. And so it absolutely impacts learning for students when they're not physically present with us in classroom. So that's been a challenge. Certainly engagement is a challenge, and I want to say the younger they are, the more challenging it is to engage students, but that's not necessarily true. If we talk to our junior high school teachers, engagement of adolescents is a challenge. We have very few students where attendance has been a big chronic challenge, but just making sure that kids are engaged in learning. And what I mean by engagement is that they are active participants, that they're asking questions, they're doing what good learners do. It has been a challenge, and we've learned a lot on how to do it better when we're in a remote or distance environment. But it certainly has been a challenge throughout the pandemic, and our teachers have risen to that challenge. Assessment validity has been something that teachers have mentioned on and off across grade levels, just noting the level of parent support and sometimes questioning, especially when we were fully remote, how valid the assessment results are. And we've seen that in lots of different subject areas across grade levels. And, you know, it's the big difference between parents wanting to help and support their child and really letting kids show us what they know independently. We know mental health and stress is ongoing for our staff and students, and I think the repercussions of that are going to be well beyond the pandemic of how we respond to the mental health needs of our community. Certainly lack of data, you know, in the springtime, we did not have our CASP testing. We were unable to do our typical reading benchmark assessment, the F&P. And then it's just been more of a challenge to actually gather even anecdotal data during the pandemic. At this point, we are expecting CASP to move forward. The questions from the state kind of continues to still be there, but we are planning for that. Not sure what that data will actually provide for us, but it will be a data point. And then feedback. Feedback is always a challenge for teachers. It is a time-consuming and a really critical part of the learning process. But when we don't have students with us, to be able to give them that direct feedback or watch them watch the feedback, sometimes we know it's a challenge whether or not students are actually accessing the feedback or families are accessing the feedback that teachers are giving. So we have learned so much from springtime and how to do some of these things better, but I just want to be clear that there are challenges and ongoing challenges when we don't have students back full-time in our classrooms. Next slide. So as I said, we certainly learned a lot in the springtime. You know, when we went into more of our emergency remote teaching timeframe, we got a lot of feedback from families, we got feedback from students, and we certainly got feedback from teachers on how we can do things better. And so this year, I believe we've absolutely risen to the occasion. When I think about other districts in our county and beyond our county, what we are able to provide is pretty tremendous. And so some of those updates there on the left, I want to make sure that the board knows and that our families know that we are providing an incredibly comprehensive learning experience for our students. Our students are getting all of their specials, their computer science, their music, their physical education, their electives at the upper grades. It's incredibly comprehensive when we still have school districts around us who, you know, a student may see their teacher for an hour over the course of a week, that they're relying on packet work, that they're really relying on core subjects only and students aren't getting their specials. We really have been thoughtfully designing that learning experience in a comprehensive way. Students that I think some things that have helped us is the second bullet here, that we have been able to align our curriculum like it's never been aligned before across all of our schools and all of our grade levels. And kind of the driver of that is the learning plan that we developed in response to springtime. And that has allowed students to get a similar and high quality learning experience that we were unable to deliver in the springtime for certain. We meet with grade levels each month, every single grade level as a group, to talk about that alignment and pacing and how it's going. And teachers know that they have some flexibility within that pacing. But especially with program changes, students moving from blended to in-person and back and forth, that we know we need to be aligned so students aren't missing out on important curriculum. And we will be able to, by the end of the school year, deliver all of our expected curriculum, all of our reading and writing and phonics units, all of our math units. Will be across the board for all students in our elementary grade levels. What else do I want to say? Common assessments, our curriculum units do have common assessments embedded within them. And I know that our teachers really value their Wednesday time. Because that Wednesday is so critical, our teachers are balancing the work that they're doing in person with students with the work that students are doing independently on their asynchronous days, and to have that time with their professional learning community, their team, to really look at student data and how students are performing and plan on how to respond. It's critical, and I believe that this is why our students overall are really performing very well for being in the middle of a pandemic. Let me check my notes to make sure I didn't forget anything there. Nope. Next slide. I don't know if the board has had a chance to actually see a learning plan. I need to absolutely give a shout out to our instructional support teachers, our ISTs. I have a lot of shout outs in this presentation, but our ISTs did not get a job to become a curriculum designer or video star. They really took their job to be a coach for teachers, but this year they have been incredibly adaptable and fantastic in developing learning plans across the board in subject areas from kindergarten through 5th grade for our ISTs, and then our upper folks are mostly doing their own, although we do have some math learning plans happening centrally. But I didn't know if the board wanted to take a chance or take a minute to watch. These are unit overviews on the left. I can't remember. I think it's a 4th grade unit. This is Natalie Axley, who's one of our teachers who was covering a maternity leave from one of our ISTs. So she's developed on the left there a math unit. And this is just the quick 1-minute video. And then on the right, we have a 1st grade social studies unit by Sarah Gerlinger, another one of our great coaches and mentors. When I talk to my peers countywide, and I see that teachers in other districts are really being asked to create all of their curriculum and learning experience for kids. And I feel really fortunate that we kind of came up with this in the springtime, as invention is the mother of necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, other way around. This idea of the learning plan. And it really, when I talk with teachers, they are so thankful that they have them as a great base that they can then work from. But is the board interested in seeing a little snippet video, or do you want me to move on?
No, can I see? I would be interested. Is anyone else? Okay, great.
Yeah. Marcy, why don't you start with math? Mrs. Axley has become a little famous with her students. She got a whole Valentine delivery from her fans.
Hey, 4th graders, welcome to Unit 5, where we're going to be talking all about fractions. And this is one of my absolute favorite units to teach ever, so I'm really excited that we get to do it together. As usual, we're thinking about 3 different parts. In part 1, we're going to make some fraction kits or fraction strips. These are going to be our tools throughout the unit that we can use to visualize and touch exactly what fractions are. Just like in 3rd grade, you learned about what a half is, what a third is. We're going to talk about even more fractions and how they relate to each other by putting them on a number line and comparing them and thinking which ones are actually the same. In part 2, we're going to talk about decomposing fractions, and that basically means taking a fraction and splitting it into smaller parts in a couple of different ways. It'll make sense when we get there. And then in part 3, we're going to talk about multiplying a fraction by a whole number. For example, 4 times 1/3, and how to get that kind of answer. And then also, as usual, we're going to do a bunch of review in preparation for your milestone task.
She's a superstar. Do you want to play the other one, Marcy? This is 1st grade science.
Hello, welcome to Social Studies with Miss G. It is so nice to see you again, 1st graders. We are ready to start a whole new unit together. Let's go, okay? Let's look at this picture. Do you know what it is? What do you think it shows? How about if I drop another picture on top of it? Do you see it now? It's our world. Well, actually, it's a map of our world. In this unit, we're going to learn all about the world and where we live. But in order to do that, we're going to learn how to use 2 different tools: maps and globes. Once we have some tools to use, we'll be ready to learn about some specific places on Earth and how to locate those places. Finally, you'll learn about a very important part of the world, people. And you'll learn how it is that people live where they live. So, first graders, are you ready to do some big work in social studies with me? All right, let's go. Our journey begins now.
They're amazing. I love how each one kind of just hits their audience so nicely, right? Fourth graders need something a little bit different than the first graders. Next slide, Marcy. Shout out to Marcy too, who learned how to do a live video in a Zoom meeting. Wanted to talk about the academic supports we have in place. So we have good curriculum. We know we have amazing teachers, but we also know that we have students who had a tricky springtime end to their school year and who have not been with us full time this year. So we have put in a lot of supports in place from the get-go or have added them over time as we see a need. So we have our LASD Plus program serving students who really have a very difficult time accessing their learning at home, distance learning. So we have students across all of our campuses being able to do their distance learning work on one of our campuses with some adult support. And we know that that's absolutely making a difference. Our ELD team, our English language development team, has really risen to the occasion. We've added many additional hours so they can support our English learners. They are providing both in-person support as well as virtual support, depends on the school and the grade level and the student, in groups, and are really just doing an amazing job of making sure that our new English learners are actually gaining their proficiency in English. And most of that is through discussion and conversation and talk. So they have really adapted a lot of what they normally do with students in this time. Mr. Drummond has started his new Reading Fellows program. We have now 12 community reading tutors who are kind of piloting this program with primary grade students over at Allman School. And we continue to hear Greg work with his friend every day at 2:30 for 30 minutes and really know that this is going to make a difference in the lives of kids who are just having a little bit of extra struggle in learning how to read. And it's an additional support that the community is so wonderful once they're trained that they have an opportunity to work with students for an additional level of really targeted reading intervention. Over at Santa Rita, we have our great LLI reading intervention program that Katrina Waters runs over there as our reading specialist, working with students who need additional support. I believe she is serving kids both in person and virtually to make sure that they get that additional reading support. We have a new pilot happening at Springer and Oak schools with a tool called Spring Math, and it's a math intervention. So we have trained a few of our classified instructional aides for some additional hours beyond their typical work hours. And Karen Wilson in my department is working with them to really make sure that we're providing some math intervention for students who are having some difficulty meeting their grade level expectations. So that's a program that we are looking forward to using this summer, as just Karen and this team has been getting into it as a component of our math intervention work. At each of our sites has a care team, which is really the team that our teachers bring students to do some troubleshooting, to get some support and guidance. That team is typically made up of principals, school psychologists, and teachers. And it's really making sure that we have our eye on students who are not making the growth and progress that we expect them to make. Each of our teachers is using small groups, whether they're in virtual school or in-person school, to make sure that they're giving some targeted attention to students who need it. And then of course, we do have our instructional support teachers available, and they are regularly coaching with teachers who, again, just need some additional strategies. Here's a student, I've tried everything in my toolkit, I need some other ideas. So our ISTs are doing that work as well. And also, of course, we do have our monthly grade level meetings with each grade level to really talk about how teaching and learning is going. The ISTs are there to talk through any problems, concerns, issues, and to introduce the new learning plans, to let teachers know kind of what's tricky and what they need to plan for, and all of that. So we have lots of supports in place to make sure that we're doing as much as we possibly can to support students in the now. And we're not just waiting for a summer program, or we're not just waiting until the pandemic is over, but what is everything we can possibly be doing right now to support students. Next slide.
Sandra,
Yep.
I have a question on ISTs. You don't have to go back. How many ISTs do we have?
Ooh. Well, we have, I think it's 8. And some of them also serve as mentors, new teacher mentors.
How many, how many could we use if you had infinite budget? What would you do?
Infinite budget, I would love 2 at each of our sites, including junior high school.
Okay, all right.
So we come to the big question, right? That, you know, everything in the news, are students experiencing learning loss as a result of the pandemic? And, you know, I highlighted the word learning loss. It is definitely a hot topic if you're in the educational sphere at all and reading what's happening out there. This phrase in and of itself is a bit controversial. Part of the problem with the idea of learning loss is that it is not well defined. So as I have been reading different things and thinking through, I think of 3 different things when I think about learning loss. Is it about regression, that students are actually losing the knowledge and skills that they've had and they're regressing backwards, that they're losing the learning? Is it a lack of growth compared to what we would normally expect in a given school year at a given time? Or is it missed learning opportunities because we're only focused in on a few things and not everything? So as we go through this, I want you to think about it in those 3 ways. Are students going backwards in their skills? Are they just not making the expected growth or growing at all? Maybe they're not losing, but they're not growing. They're kind of stagnant. And are students missing out on learning opportunities? So those are kind of the 3 frames that I want you to think about as we attempt to answer this question tonight. Are we ready to get started and actually start looking at some data, or do you have any other questions before we go into it? Anybody? All right, if we're ready, let's roll. I can't see you all, so speak up if you have something. So let's talk about the data we actually found after not just a little bit of effort, but quite a bit of effort for students. And so we're really focusing on 3 different areas. And again, this is for our K-5 students. So I have report card scores in ELA and math, specifically reading and writing. Even though there are more scores, I focused just on reading and writing, and I focused on 1 unit of math for trimester 1. And I'll remind you that trimester 1 ended in early November. So while this does give us some data, it gives us really early in the year data. The second set will stop after that first round, and I can answer any questions or what have you. And then we're going to go into reading benchmark data. And this is more recent data. This is data that our teachers took in January, very early February. And this uses one of 2 tools. One is F&P, the Fontes and Pinnell Reading Benchmark Assessment, which is our typical assessment that we've given now for, I don't know, 3 plus years with some consistency, but this test must be given in person in order for it to be valid. So because we know we have a virtual school, we are using a third-party tool called Literably. It's kind of a funny name. Literably is our third-party online benchmark assessment. It actually aligns very well with F&P. They use similar text. They use the same benchmark. So while I don't want to completely compare the two, I feel fairly confident that they're close-ish. Okay, so we will look at reading against the established benchmark, which is nice because it's not a special pandemic benchmark. It's the benchmark we use every single year. And then lastly, I reached out to teachers and provided some teacher feedback on how students are performing, what are some successes, what are some challenges. And so we will look at that as well. So next slide. And next slide. So let's go into report card. So sorry, I have all my notes here. So here we are, very highest level possible is looking at the T1 report cards early November for reading and writing. And so for this, we used our mastery rubric, our 4-3-2-1 right on the report cards. And this is the percent of all students across K-5 and where they scored at the end of the first trimester in reading and in writing. So as I was going through this data, right, this is the first thing I looked at when I used my pivot table. I love pivot tables. My questions that I was thinking to myself, like, I wonder if we're going to see a difference in grade level. I really wanted to know, how does this compare to last year? And I was hoping that that wasn't going to be too difficult to find. My big other question, looking at reading, in my gut, I felt like reading was fairly close to what I would have expected, but writing seemed a little concerning to me. When I look at our writing scores, having 18% in that developing 2 level and not even half of our students, or really not even close to half in that level 4, it made me start to think like, I wonder what's happening with writing scores here. So we'll continue to peruse those things. Next slide. So then I went into grade level by grade level. Thank you to my pivot tables for reading and writing. So you can, I'm sure you've had a chance to look a little bit at this data, but real clearly, just looking at our primary grades, K1 and 2, I see a big difference in K and 1 as compared to 2. And reading is in the red and writing is in the blue there. So I wanted to look a little bit deeper into kindergarten. We know that our K1 students are our least independent. They have the kind of the most trouble, and this was the end of trimester 1. So we know that they spent, our first graders for certain, spent a significant amount of the end of their kindergarten year learning online, and the beginning of their first grade year also learning online. So in what way did that impact our early reading scores in trimester 1? I can't wait till later this month. At the end of this week, actually, we close out trimester 2, but it will be really interesting to look to see what the growth was like between those 2 trimesters, 1 and 2. What else? Again, I'm looking at those writing scores, which, too many students below the line for me in writing. And so what I've been pondering about writing, and I still don't have the answer today, but I'm going to start asking this in our grade level meetings, is I'm curious about writing, if it's our students are not acquiring their typical skills in writing, or have they lost some skills in writing, or has the pandemic and so much time online actually harmed our production of writing? You know, when we especially in the primary grades, but our ELA curriculum is very volume based. We want kids to be reading a lot, and we want kids to be writing a lot. And I know just anecdotally talking with teachers that writing production has been a challenge. When students are not in person with their classroom teacher, their volume suffers. So is it a volume problem or is it a skills problem? And that's something we're still exploring the answer to that. So those are our primary grades. Next slide, let's look at 3, 4, 5. And overall, I think that they are fairly similar numbers kind of below the line, that developing and beginning. Again, the writing scores look a little higher than I would want. Differently than our primary grades, we have very few students in the beginning range, right? 1%, 2%, 3% as compared to our primary. And so it really makes me think of how do we make sure between now and the end of the school year that those students in that developing group, what can we do to get them above the line, right? Very few, those kids in the red, we really need to make sure that they're receiving some more intensive support, but sometimes those students in that developing area really just need a push to get above. So some interesting work and investigation, we need to look there. Next slide. So then I wanted to look at our special populations of students. So this slide compares all students up at the top with our socioeconomically disadvantaged students, SED, with our students who are in special education or who have a 504, and then our English learners. So I wanted to just look at overall, these are all students, how are those compared? Our socioeconomically disadvantaged students are really concerning to me. We know as we've worked with Principals Exchange and Arenda, and we've done our equity audit 4 or so years ago, that that's a population of students we want to make sure that we're looking closely at and we're serving. So I don't like to see the high percentage of those numbers below the line. I know our students in special education and 504 have plans where they're receiving additional accommodations or supports or modifications. And of course, our English learners are tricky to look at in this way because if you are designated an English learner, by definition, it means you are not proficient in English. So I would expect English learners to be below the line. Once they get above to that approaching or mastery level, that's when we begin to look at reclassifying them as English fluent or English proficient. So looking at this, it made me think of, I wonder how this compares to years past. Is this worse or better or about the same than it was in previous school years? Because we know historically there have been 12 to 15 to 18% of students who are below the line when we look at our standardized testing and our F&P testing and what have you. Next slide. So then I wanted to do a bit of a deep dive. And again, one person with a couple of helpers getting me through this very interesting project. I decided to focus in on 2 grade levels, 1st grade and 4th grade, and look at some historical data. So you can look at, in the red is this current year from T1, and in the blue is last year from T1, before any of us ever were so comfortable with the word pandemic. Who would have ever thought in November of 2019 that we would be going there? So you can look and see what 1st grade comparisons look like. Writing is fairly close, at least below the line there. Our reading is really interesting. The number of students in the beginning compared to mastery, that 1 and 4 level is pretty off. It's just an interesting tidbit that I saw. And then the big question for me is, how will these scores shift for T2? Because we do want to make sure that each of our students is making significant growth. So let's look at 4th grade on the next slide. 4th grade is the year typically where, academics ramp up a little bit. So here you can see that comparison of 4th grade T1 report cards. We have more students below the line in reading and writing this year, certainly, than we did in years past. And then let's move on to the next slide. And then did look very briefly at math. We do not have as much data in math, common data that we collect centrally. So how I decided to look at a little bit at math is by choosing kind of the most foundational unit of instruction that teachers taught in the first trimester. So in kindergarten, it was writing and counting to 20. This is an important foundational skill in writing. And you can see this year that our students are doing fairly well. In 1st grade, it's adding and subtracting within 20. Again, a kind of the extension of that first kindergarten area. And then in 2nd grade is the foundations for multiplication. Next slide, let's look at the upper grades. And you can see here, foundations for multiplication and division grows into multiplication. And by 5th grade, we're looking at operations with whole numbers. As I have met with and chatted with teachers, whether walking through classrooms or through our listening to our grade level meetings, what I hear from teachers is not a concern about math. Out of whack of any additional like typical concern that they have for some students not doing well in math. The area that seems to come up the most in these conversations is actually writing, which our data bears out on a larger scale. So the gut of our teachers is right on. All right, that was the end of report card section. So let me pause and see what questions, comments, concerns before we move into our reading benchmark data.
Another question about the special populations.
Yep.
In the percentages you showed, are some children in multiple of those populations?
They are. Yes, they absolutely are. And, as in one of the summary slides towards the end, I think I looked at just at 1st grade and 4th grade special populations in a comparison. And it made me think of, because I was looking at the number of students, and I remember talking with Robin and Danelle from Principals Exchange Arenda about our N is so small. Our actual number of students is so small that it's hard to make like a sweeping generalization or even a sweeping plan for what would support students, because we're really talking, in 1st grade, I can't remember, I don't have it in front of me, but it was like 17 students or something like that, right? It's a very small population, but a population that we have continued to underserve as a district. And I do believe we are making gains with our new curriculum, with our interventions that we now have in place, and more systematic work happening across the district. But this pandemic kind of made it harder for us to see that, I would say. Any other questions before we move on to benchmark reading? All right, then let's move on to F&P and literally. So silly. So we absolutely, so I wanted more data than what T1 back in November. So we have our new F&P and literally data. And so this first slide again is that kind of holistic slide for all students K-5. And we're not going to compare apples to apples, but I feel like it might be like a red delicious versus a golden delicious. I think they're close and in the same realm, but they're not exact. So if you look holistically at these benchmark scores, let's see, just reading through my own notes. Our students overall are, so we did have and you'll see this moving forward, we did not get to assess every single student in the in-person F&P because of absences. Typically, maybe a student had to be quarantining at home during that piece of time. So it's not 100% representative. But looking at these scores, our students in the exceeding benchmark group is really remarkable for this time in the school year. We continue to have that 11-12% of students below the line. Those are the students that we want to move over and we want to move up. It's just what we want to do. So let's dive in a little more closely and see what this all means. Next slide. So this is, you know, we change things up a lot around here, and we have collected F&P data at different times throughout the school year, depending on the year, trying to kind of make it more manageable for teachers, to make it manageable on the data collection side. So while the current data you're seeing in blue and green is from kind of a winter score, we have never collected winter data for all students. So I didn't have exact data to compare, but we are working on a benchmark. And so this is actually spring data from 2018. And again, we're using the exact same benchmark. So not apples to apples, more a little bit different, but you can see at any given time that in spring of 2018, we are faring better. Our students are faring better than they did back in 2018. I have a lot of assumptions that I can make about why that is. I believe we have stronger curriculum, we have stronger alignment, we have our teachers really well trained in teaching reading, but we still have students below the line, and we're not happy with that. Next slide. So going in by grade level, you can see here, again, we're looking at kinder, first grade, and second grade. How are our students doing as of January, February? You might remember our data from the T1 report cards where we had our kinder and first grade. Again, we see that perhaps we have, and, you know, I had a really interesting conversation with Mrs. Leach about the virtual school. I think it is a challenge to teach students how to read in a fully virtual realm, and our teachers are doing an incredible job, and our students are doing an incredible job, and their families are doing an incredible job, but it does pose an additional challenge. And I wonder if that's why the data just does look a little bit different in kindergarten. As we get to the older grades, students have a foundation in reading and phonics and phonemic awareness that our kinder students are just building right now. Otherwise, what else do I want to say? That was kind of the big challenge to me. Next slide. So here we're up into our upper grades, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. You can see how students did on their benchmark assessment. Just an interesting note, you know, the kind of national drive to have students reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade is a big push. You know, we have still a handful of students below the line in third grade, but a significant third grade kind of blew my mind a little bit with their 80+% in the exceeding benchmark range. I do believe that our new reading curriculum and phonics is really making a difference. And anecdotally, when I talk with our primary teachers who are now, especially our third grade teachers, they notice a difference with our students coming to them with a stronger foundation in phonics and foundational reading. We don't have that same foundation in our upper grade students. We were not systematically using our curriculum at that point in time when they were in their primary grades. But still, we're looking at how can we move those students below the line up? And how can we make sure that the supports we're providing are the supports that our students need to move to above the line? Next slide. And so as Mr. Drummond told me, I don't have the working memory to hold this all in one place. Sandra, put it together on a slide for me. So as I was going through this again today, that lower left slide there, the approaching at 16% and 41%, that is actually first grade. I didn't name it. It's not all students. It is first grade reading scores that we looked at a few slides back. But when we look here and we think about bringing all of these pieces together, and this is data that you've seen before, except for the lower right-hand side where I dove in a little bit to our socioeconomically disadvantaged first graders and fourth graders to see comparatively how are they doing. So on the left there, we have total scores for first grade, and on the right there on the bottom, we have total scores for our socioeconomically disadvantaged group. I hope that makes sense. So we still have, we know we have students below the line. And I think it's about really understanding. I think this will be an interesting conversation with principals and teachers, but understanding who are the 17 first graders below the line there, and how can we make sure that, are they accessing our LASD plus programs? Are they getting the additional reading support that they might need? What else do they need in order to help us move them across? Do they need access to books? All of that. Are they taking advantage of our amazing library, school libraries that our librarians are working so hard to get books into the hands of students? Are they taking advantage of that? So we really want to get to know student by student what their needs are to make sure we can help them move above the line.
Can I just ask before you
Yep.
move on? I was just curious, the SED special population, do you know if they're mostly in blended or virtual?
I don't know the answer to that, Shelly. That's a good.
I was just curious to
Yeah.
see if that made a difference.
I will look into that. My gut tells me, just from conversations I've had, that they're kind of in both programs. I don't think there's a kind of concentration of one or the other.
Sandra, can I ask, the bottom right-hand square there says 19/20, but shouldn't that be 2021? From these results, or it says T1 reading T1 scores 19/20, but weren't these from the fall? So
no, this is historical 19/20 data. This is 1 year ago.
Okay, so that is 1 year ago.
It
so
is.
We don't have the.
Yep.
Okay.
To be compared with the data above, Sandra.
Correct. Yep.
As a whole, not
Which
as
is all students. Yes.
Right, but the data above is all students across all grades.
Correct.
Right.
All right. What questions do you have?
with board members, it's kind of hard for me to see you. So just jump in with your question.
Kendra?
Yes, Vladimir.
You know this way better than I do, so this suggestion may be useless. But it would seem to me that you might want to look and see if there are clusters of kids who don't have the reading or the math that we would like. Obviously, well, yeah. So the difference between first grade and second grade was interesting. Are there some kids who just don't make that leap, if you want, and then are behind for the rest of the time? Is there, something like that might be interesting to try to tease out? And I would assign it to Greg or something like that.
That would be interesting to tease out because, on the actual benchmark, the F&P benchmark that goes from kindergarten through 8th grade, from level A all the way to level Z. First grade is really the area where the students are expected to jump the most levels. I think they are expected to start first grade at a D and they leave at like a J or something like that. It's 7 or so levels in there, where most grade levels, it's, 1, 2, or 3 of those marks. So it would be interesting to kind of look closely at that first to second grade area. Yeah, that would be a little deep dive into the data. Anything else before we go to look at teacher feedback? All right, next slide, Marcy. So I thought it was really important to talk to teachers. I attempted to ask for kind of holistic data from teachers, but I didn't get enough collective data to make it feel presentable to me. But I certainly got some amazing anecdotes and comments and what have you from teachers. And as we go through these, I won't read them all to you, but the highlighted parts really represent kind of common themes, hearing from the many teachers who responded to the survey about successes, challenges, etc. So one was absolutely about the power of LASD plus. This is, of course, a comment from 6th grade, a 6th grade teacher at Santa Rita. But really knowing that the power of the LASD Plus program is allowing students to not only just get their work done, but actually participate in their learning in a more meaningful way with some adult guidance each and every day when they're not physically in the classroom. And it really has made a world of difference. We've seen our older students kind of getting through their work in a more positive way. We've seen our primary students who need that additional level of support out at our school sites, really getting the support they need to be able to really access their learning in meaningful ways. So we're so happy that we are able to provide that as a support for students who need it within our community. Next slide. This was a very common theme, this idea that learning this year has absolutely been a partnership. And I know it's been a huge challenge for our parents and our students. We have, as the teacher says, whether we're in virtual or if we're in person for 2 days or on asynchronous learning days, that the relationships with students is really critical, and that relationship with families is critical. And our students and families are working hard to make learning happen this year. And I know that everybody is looking forward to the day when we come back to school 5 days a week. And we are looking forward to that as well. Next slide. This is coming from one of our primary teachers who really is back working in person with students, so has half of her students at any one time and really feels like that small class size, because it's half of the class, really allows her to meet the needs of her students in a more targeted and meaningful way, and is appreciative of the learning plans. That has definitely been a common theme. Next slide. is all about program support. So knowing that many of our students require additional supports, and we're happy to provide those supports in English language development through our resource or other special education program. But this has been a common theme, that partnership with the school site team is really allowing students to make progress, which is great. And I didn't really highlight it above, but this idea that students may have, this example happens to be an English learner, but I heard from some first grade teachers where students started the year perhaps behind on that benchmark expectation, but are making significant growth. And especially many of our teachers are reporting when they are in person, that the teachers have really seen kind of that growth increase when they're back on campus. Next slide is another reminder about our student work ethic, because, you know, especially the older this child gets, the more they need to want to do it. And then that parent support is really critical. And we know that this is especially true for virtual school, for families who have chosen to have their child remain in virtual school. It's our largest school right now, and that parent support is really critical. Talking with Mrs. Leach, the students that they're most concerned around are just ones that aren't showing up, or deciding when they would like to show up, instead of really sticking to the program that we've designed to be a virtual program that is proving successful to family for student learning. Next slide. This is a long quote from one of our more veteran teachers within our district, but just this idea that we are providing outstanding learning opportunities for our students in a wide variety of subject areas and specials. And she's really appreciative that our students are getting all of those opportunities, and is also especially appreciative of having that dedicated Wednesday to be able to plan. And as she says, she's making the best lesson plans she's ever had the time to make before, which is great. We know that our teachers who are in person are really balancing that at-home work and support from students, and meeting with students every day and customizing things for them. And that our teachers really value that planning time on Wednesday to do that lesson planning work, and also to meet with their colleagues and talk about student data and performance and how teachers need to respond. Next slide. This is a somewhat common theme as well, that once our students are back on campus, that some of our students are showing kind of this adult dependency or parental assistance dependency, and that they've lost their stamina a little bit. You know, that idea, back to that question about writing volume, right? If we kind of lose our stamina, it's something we can rebuild like a muscle, but that when we rely on our parents to swoop in, we perhaps take away that productive struggle that's so important in learning, and that our teachers want to see, that we just have to kind of rebuild that learning muscle a little bit. And then I thought the second one was interesting, that her students have bonded much more than in previous years. You know, we have kids coming in small cohorts, and they are playing and eating with their small cohort. They may or may not have their typical grade level friend that they've had, you know, throughout the years, or who they might play with in a normal year. And it's really forced, in a good way, our students to kind of expand their social group and to get to know new students and create new bonds, which is terrific. Any comments about the teacher feedback before we go to some of our takeaways?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yes, Vladimir.
If you go back to slide 28, you don't have to do it, but on slide 28, where you talk about class size, boy, it would be really nice to have the size of a class, wouldn't it? To have half as many students in a class. And it's no wonder that it shows up in you know, the student and their learning.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe we can get Jeff to just give us some more money.
Well, and it's funny, as I've been perusing through schools right now, there seems to be a sweet spot. I had an interesting conversation with one of our second grade teachers who shared with me, the two cohorts that he sees over the course of the week. One is markedly small, and he told me, he said, Sandra, I would never say this, but it's too small. Like, I need more bodies in the classroom. Like, the kids aren't really talking and engaging. Like, there's not the energy that a slightly larger group of students brings. So it's finding that sweet spot. And then, Vladimir, I think about perpetual low class sizes to a degree. It makes me think about, where the heck do you find all those teachers? Because that's a problem as well.
There are lots of
Yeah.
issues to take care of, but
Yes.
finding quality teachers, is a huge problem. No question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's go to some key takeaways. So I certainly want to start with that first one there, that I really believe our teachers are doing a tremendous job. Each and every one of them has learned so much from spring, when they were just thrust into this experience. And besides tools, they really are wanting to meet the needs of their students, knowing that we are living through a pandemic, that everything is more challenging and everything just requires more effort and time. So I want to really make sure that our teachers know that we are so appreciative of their dedication and work to make sure that our students are getting the very best that they can right now. My hot claim there on the second bullet is that there's no indication of learning loss. So I want to go back to those three areas that we talked about. The first one was regression, students actually losing learning. Other than perhaps our most significantly impaired students in some of our specialized programs, I have not heard from one teacher who believes that a student has regressed in their learning. So I want to say that I have not heard anything, and have not seen data that would support that. The second part of the three areas around learning loss, I can't remember my order, but was around losing opportunities for learning. So I want to remind you, our students are having full access to a year-long comprehensive academic program. And I do not believe that our students are losing learning opportunities. We may have some families who are choosing, whether it's for wanting to reduce screen time or something like that. We do have some families who are choosing perhaps not to fully participate in the whole breadth of our program, but every K-5 student has an opportunity for a comprehensive program. And then the third part was around that we are not seeing students grow, that there's not adequate growth. I would say that from the data and from my conversations with teachers, our students are making growth. We absolutely have students who are below the line, and we have had students who are below the line even before the pandemic. It is not clear to me yet whether or not it's drastically different from years past. The data we looked at tonight, we have students below the line. It's getting to understand who are those students and how can we serve those students. But I feel very confident in saying globally, students in Los Altos School District are not experiencing learning loss. We may certainly have, we do have individual students below the line. We have students that we want to make sure do not fall below the line. But we certainly don't have widespread learning loss that I feel like is kind of in the news that people are concerned about. I don't want to paint a picture like everything is rosy and our kids are just fine and they're learning, but I certainly believe that kids are growing, they're making progress, they have access to a great education. And the most recent data we have around reading benchmarking looks very positive overall compared
Sandra,
to.
I'll just interject here.
Yep.
Yes, all that being said,
Yes.
I want to be perfectly clear that our preference is
Oh.
to be in person with students.
Absolutely.
Right? That remains our goal, but working through the situation we have, this is the data we are seeing at this point in time. I believe our teachers, their preference would be to be back in person. The work becomes a lot more streamlined when we aren't working to have a hybrid program, right? There is an increased workload, and I know our teachers are feeling it, and they too want to be back in person as soon as we can do that safely and as soon as we have permission from the powers that be.
Yeah, most absolutely. Absolutely. Another key takeaway is this: I really want to explore the area of writing more. And this question, is it just a lack of volume and production on the part of students, or are we not making progress? So my next kind of to do around that area is to look at our T2 scores, and then I'm going to start chatting with teachers around writing specifically. I know some of our schools are kind of doing a deep dive in writing right now because their teachers are also concerned or have questions about this. And so they're doing some school-wide common assessments around writing to look to see and setting some very specific goals to make sure that students make that progress before the end of the school year. I certainly, we will continue to prioritize our socioeconomically disadvantaged students as we build out our summer school offerings. That is the group that I am concerned about. Again, understanding individuals, but as a whole. We are working with, Greg Drummond has already started, or tomorrow, I guess we have our kinder meeting, but we'll be talking with our K1 teachers about some additional supports they have to support our struggling readers or readers who are struggling. Some additional phonemic awareness resources for them. And then, of course, I know this is only a K5 kind of deep dive, and we certainly want to look at 6-8 and see how our students are performing at that level. So my plan is to reach out to our junior high principals to see what they might want to look at specifically. And a challenge around 6-8 is most of our students by 6th grade have tested out of our reading benchmark assessment. So I don't really have a common reading assessment for all students there. We do have some targeted student data that we can look at. We certainly can pull some report card data, and the end of the quarter is coming up shortly. And then we will have some math scores coming up for 6th and 7th grade students as we get closer to April timeframe, I believe. So we will certainly have some data to look at, and look forward to coming back to talk to you about that. Anybody want to talk about this before we move on to summer programming?
I have a question around the virtual school seems to be working a lot stronger than I thought it would, to be honest with you. I'm pleased to see that. But it sounds like you've mentioned a few families that are engaging on their own pace.
Yes.
As we move into this last trimester, are we trying to do something to talk to families where the child doesn't seem to be engaging well in this, and try to move them to in person?
Yep. So we have been, and it goes both ways, honestly, Steve. We just started March, early February. We were working with principals, seeing that families who were participating in our blended program but not sending their children to school, right? We kind of gave them a time frame and said, you know, you can do one or the other, but you can't have asynchronous school 5 days a week. Like, that's not good for any student. So many kids began attending in person, and a few of them switched to our virtual school. So our next round, working with Mrs. Leach, is really identifying, and it's just a small handful of students who want to create their own program. And we're really trying to kind of set the expectation of what virtual school looks like. It certainly has been a successful model, I believe. I do a lot of materials pickup around the DO when folks come by, and I'm always asking, like, how's it going? Have you started from the beginning, or did you switch midstream? And like, people are really thankful for the opportunity to have a virtual school experience, but really feel, they all tell me how connected they are to their classroom teacher, that they're so surprised that they've made friends in their virtual classroom, and that the level of learning and kind of that nice balance of time with your teacher or time with a small group and then independent work time. So yes, we're working through those kind of individual cases.
Yeah, and it does come down to individual cases, I believe, that would be the ones that need to be coached perhaps to go a different route.
Yep, absolutely.
I think that the LASD plus, that was primarily children who were live that we felt needed more support, or doing the blended that needed more support.
Right.
I have to think there's a few in that totally virtual that could benefit from that as well.
Yep, absolutely. We just talked about one today. Yep. Anything else before we move? All right, let's talk a little bit about summer. So this year, typically we hold our 2 summer programs on one school campus. Last year, we canceled our traditional summer school, and we offered an extended school year in a virtual realm only, because we were kind of in the throes of the pandemic. So this year, we're actually, because of the health and safety guidelines and the challenges with that, we are holding the programs at 2 separate schools, and it just felt easier to manage in that way, and hopefully resulting in better programs for both. So our extended school year, ESY, is for students who have that need as their IEP indicates. Typically, that is our students who are in our SDC, or special day classes. And I found a typo, sorry about that. And in our preschool program, they will be attending school for 4 weeks, the 14th until early July. That will be at Covington School this year, and it's the typical half-day program, very similar to what we've offered pre-pandemic. Each child really works with their case manager to understand what their individual learning should look like for summertime. So that is our ESY program. Next slide. So we are just at the beginning of kind of designing our summer academy, our general education summer program, but we certainly know we want to provide instruction and some intervention in reading, writing, academic vocabulary, math, and we want to have some more than just academics, a little bit of fun and excitement in there. So we're working on a really high interest STEM project, a building project for students. You will remember the last 2 years pre-pandemic, we partnered with the YMCA. Students had mostly a camp experience, and then had an intensive reading intervention time with one of our teachers. But we knew this summer we really wanted to be responsive and offer much more academics than just that one small group of reading intervention. So we're in the process of looking at the student data to decide who we need to serve, what grade levels. I am very inclined to have it be an in-person program. Our ESY will be an in-person program. But have been thinking about perhaps a 6-8 program that could be virtual, still working out the details on that. We really want to make sure that our teachers and our students have a break. So we're not going to start, as we typically do, in mid-June, right after school gets out, but really focus on the month of July for our program, and to have it be not quite a full school day, but a pretty comprehensive day of learning. We were thrilled when Teachers College, the folks at Columbia University, just announced that they have developed reading and writing summer school curriculum. We're going to a webinar, I think tomorrow or Wednesday, on the details of the curriculum, but they really have created foundational units of study specifically to be used for summer school students at this time in our world, that will really focus on those important foundational skills for each and every grade level. So each unit and each day focuses on a read aloud, a targeted skills review, and then a targeted reading or writing workshop. So we're excited to learn more about that and probably have that be the base of our reading and writing curriculum. We have been and we're already piloting an academic vocabulary program at Almond and at Santa Rita that we would like to incorporate into our summer school program. We have our spring math pilot happening at Oak and Springer that we want to bring into our summer program. And then what was really exciting is that Teachers College said that they're going to have a special course that would require students to kind of be assessed to get into this. But an intensive phonemic awareness and phonics summer institute or summer instruction for our upper grade students. And again, these are our students who have continually struggled as readers and have hit their upper grade world without that strong foundations that our new phonics and reading program provides students. But we certainly know we have some students who will benefit from this type of very intensive phonemic awareness and phonics instruction as part of their summer school program. Do I have any more notes? So we are working.
Sandra, the one caveat I would put on this is that both for the ESY and for the Summer Academy is this is 4 months out,
Sure.
right? And we don't know what the requirements are going to be from public health. They could be less restrictive, right? They could potentially be more restrictive. We're of course hoping for less restrictive here as we continue to demonstrate our ability to function in a pandemic pretty effectively. So I just want to make sure that's always
Thank you for that reminder.
The world does change quickly for us.
That is the truth. We've gotten very good at adapting, and as we develop a program, we will be thinking about how can it shift as needed based on that. So right now, our work is really to figure out the right students that we want to invite to summer school. So we have a process that we've used the past few years. We're looking at some additional data because the scope of our instruction is broader than just reading. So we are starting that as our end of trimester and end of quarter is coming up. So we really see the number of students that we want to invite and see what our hiring will look like for that July program as well. And then the last slide, Marcy.
Sandra, can I ask a quick question? Yeah. Sorry. I remember from previous board updates that one of the things that was really successful about the YMCA partnership was that we had both higher sort of uptake rates in terms of families accepting the invitation and then higher attendance rates than we'd ever had before.
Yep.
And I think there was a sense that was because it was camp, it wasn't school.
Yep.
And so I just wonder if there are plans to either try to survey or do some, things along those lines to try to figure out what the sweet spot is. Obviously, we do want to deliver instruction, but can't deliver instruction to kids who aren't there.
Absolutely.
And so.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it also, Brian, came from the fact that we were able, with the partnership of the Y, to offer a full day, including kind of before and after care. So we're trying to figure out what that might look like for some students who might need that. But yeah, I will also add that Grace Choi, our STEM guru, is working on an incredible project opportunity that I think will make it feel like a camp fun experience for kids, because we certainly want them to be there.
Great. And I forgive me if you said something about this and I missed it, but for 8th graders in particular, you know, our 8th graders are unfortunately in a position where a lot of them will have had very little time on campus at junior high school, and then we'll be heading off to high school. So we've got sort of twin concerns about possible learning gaps and some amount of socialization that they won't have gotten. Are there any thoughts about what we can offer there that we wouldn't in a normal year, but just to make sure that they have as smooth as possible on ramp into high school?
Yeah, you know, I have not talked with my high school counterpart for a little while, but I will be, before we design something or think about designing something, I would like to hear on their end how they might be doing something different to bring their new incoming freshmen in. But yeah, that is something we will absolutely look at.
No, I mean, I think you're right. It may make more sense for them to design it than for us to design it, but I would certainly be in favor of us supporting it. I mean, they're students in the summer between 8th and 9th grades are in this weird, like they've graduated from us, but they're not quite high school students yet. But that shouldn't, you know, cause us to not do it. And then the other comment I had just about summer school is I personally would like our mindset to be, we're going to do summer school in person, regardless of what the requirements are at the time. We're going to figure out a way to accommodate those requirements, whether that's staffing or tents. I mean, it's summer in the Bay Area. It'll rain maybe once. You know, I think we should figure out a way to have everybody in person who wants to be.
Yeah, that Brian, that my comment had more to do with how many we are going to be able to have in a class or have in an area assigned to a teacher, because there's some geography that comes into play there, right? And how much space has to be covered.
Sure, I just want to make sure we're approaching it from what's the need first, and how do we accommodate that need, not sort of what capacity do we think we have, and then, you know, what fraction of the need do we accommodate.
Right. Yep. And in addition, I forgot to include a slide, but last summer, because we didn't do our traditional summer school and the spring was so wonky, you might remember we created that whole summer learning website that had grade level by grade level, like how might you do a little refreshing, and then there were some high engagement activities. So we will be sure to kind of freshen that up and publish that out for our more typical students who might just want some additional summer learning or a preview of the next grade level or what have you. But we had a lot of access on that over the summer. Yep, go, Shali.
She was calling on me.
Oh, sorry,
it's all good. I agree with Brian on making sure, to the extent possible, this is in person, and then along those lines, we don't have Randy on here, but my understanding is the funding for this will be coming from the special funding that we get either from the federal government or state. It's all melding into one, but I want to know that we can afford this, and if not, what else? How else are we going to be trying to fund this? Either way, I want to do this.
Yes, I know I have some typical federal funds, my title funds that support at-risk learners, at-promise learners, because we didn't really use them last year for summer school. So I have kind of 2 years worth of as a starting place. And I know Randy and I have talked about other buckets of money from the learning loss dollars and what have you, to make sure that we can provide, like Brian said, we want to fill the need and not just say we're only going to be doing this much summer school.
Since it was just announced today, I'm sure it hasn't been quantified yet, but there was some dollars that came out in the press conference this morning.
Yep.
Where they're actually be signing that off on Thursday, they said.
Right.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that on Monday's meeting and during second interim update.
More
real than it was before. Okay, good.
So I don't want to cut this conversation off, but we'll save the discussion for after we take public comment. I know we're all eager to discuss this. Sandra, do you want to go on to your next slide?
Yep, I have one more slide. Thank you, Shelley. So thought you also would want to know a little bit about what we are thinking about planning for teacher professional development for our K-5 or TK-5 teachers. You know, pending the board adopting a new math curriculum, which is in the works right now. We talked about that a little while ago, and it's now moving through Curriculum Council, but we would expect to do some comprehensive training around mathematics this summer, similar to what we did when we launched our ELA curriculum, have an opportunity for teachers to come and do that over the summer. And if they're unable to do that, then we do that in the fall with them. And then also we're excited, we've reached out to Teachers College, knowing that looking at our data that K1 student, K1, 2, we really want to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to make sure kids are meeting their reading benchmarks. Is Teachers College is going to do a homegrown reading institute, really focused on small group reading for our teachers. So we are excited. We're still working out the details of when exactly that's going to happen, but we are really excited about bringing Teachers College back. Our teachers generally love to go to either New York to go to a real Teachers College Institute, or we've had them come in the past when we launched our curriculum. So we're looking forward to that and think it will just add to our teacher toolkit of how we can support our students in their foundational reading skills. And I think that is it for me. So, Shelley.
Thank you, Sandra. That was wonderful. Super, super comprehensive. Do the board members have any clarifying questions on Sandra's presentation? Okay, I'm going to open this up for public comment now. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. It looks like we have 2 takers at least.
Our first speaker is Tomer Sharon.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sandra, for the excellent presentation. It was very informative. So just some background. I have 2 kids, 2 at Springer, 1 at Locke. So 3 kids in the district, probably more than more than most. And while the data was good, I want to share my personal experience. I actually think the school district is in a crisis, and I think it's largely off the rails at this point. And the reason for that is because I don't think what students get from school is just about reading, writing, and math. In fact, in a district where many of the parents here have let's call it 6-figure salaries and can afford tutors, we can deliver math to our kids. They'll be good at math. They'll be fine at that. But when it comes to social skills and mental health, I actually did a survey of like 13 different families, and 12 of them said that they felt their kids were, to use your terminology, below the line on that. So I think that's a problem. And to the board, I'll say that when you hear the term blended learning, I want you to understand what that means, because for middle school, that means 6 months into the school year, our kids are now finally getting 7 hours a week of in-person learning, right? 7 hours in a week, and that's after 6 months of being at home. And it's not that we didn't have the opportunity as a district to open. We actually had many months of opportunity, and we delayed and we delayed. And then finally, the state did not allow us to do that. For the elementary school, it's 2 days at best, right? And that's when we don't have like a minimum day or some other reason to have less than that, right? So I'll tell you what happens in our family. For our son in first grade, Wednesday basically means 1 hour of work in the morning and something like 8 to 9 hours of roadblocks. So I don't know if you noticed that company's IPOing in the next few weeks, and that's basically on our kids, right? They're constantly on screens. They're not getting any work. And when you talk about small groups or spring math or relationships with the teachers or friendships happening over virtual school, we don't see any of that, not across any child. There's no friendships being developed. Our daughter in 7th grade, she hasn't made friends, I don't think, over virtual. So she still has her friends from elementary school. But that's really what we're experiencing. And so then you can ask, well, are there solutions to this problem? And I actually walked around Granger, and one of my observations was that there are many classrooms that are available, the art room, the multi. In fact, because not all the kids are choosing the blended model, we actually don't have to split it half and half. We could go down from 3 classes to 2 classes per grade level, and have the kids basically do what Bullis is doing, which is many of the grades are now 5 days a week, right, in in-person learning. So I actually do believe there are solutions. I totally appreciate the concern that the teachers have, right? And some are in risk conditions, and some are, older and higher risk. But we as parents, when we send our kids to in-person learning, we're taking the same risk, right? If our child gets sick at school, they come home, we're going to get sick, right? We hug and kiss our kids. That there's no difference in the risk, right? And so we can distinguish between the teachers that are higher risk and be more accommodating, and those that are lower risk, right? We know that people under 40 have a 1 in 10,000 chance of dying when they get COVID, which is a chance of dying in a car accident in a given year, right? That's my risk, and so I think we can do more things to just be a little bit more nuanced in how we solve this. And lastly, I'll say that I really like the comment. I think it was Brian said that we should start from, hey, this is what we want to achieve, and let's figure out a way. I think when you start with that mindset, then a lot of times you can figure out a way, even when it seems like you can't. So I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that was helpful, just getting the perspective of a family, right, and what we're dealing with.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Marcy, when you call the next person, can you put up our timer? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tanya Beckerman.
Hi, this is Tanya's husband, Vadim. So +1 on what Tomer mentioned. I appreciate the data that was presented, but I find it difficult to understand any type of causation effect. So for example, the fact that we are not experiencing learning loss, I can just tell you about my family. And both of my children are getting private tutoring in math. They're getting private tutoring in writing. So I am pleased to know that according to Losada's evaluation, Losada School District evaluation, they are not experiencing any learning loss. But I find it difficult to understand whether it's something that is can be the school can take credit for. Another point I wanted to make is our experience is very opposite from the families that were mentioned by Sandra, that found it very engaging with the virtual enrollment. And we have 2 kids, one absolutely for whom virtual doesn't work even in blended. By the way, both kids are in blended. The other one is doing just fine. But I found it recently is that she just doesn't seem to have the need to seek out and socialize with other kids in a distant way, in a safe and distant way. She's very content with doing it online. And I think that's something that scares me, even moving forward, that after we manage to come back to school, I think some of our kids will find that, hey, I don't need to see people in person. Doing this online through social media is just fine. And I think that's a challenge that we are going to face. Another comment that I would like to hear your answer is, I kind of saw the data that's from teachers that's very positive and very supportive. What is the constructive feedback that teachers have provided? What hasn't worked for the teachers or from the teacher's perspective for our children? Would really like to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Amy Wang.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Just want to say thanks for this really in-depth study. I'm curious as to whether there's data you can look into on students or families asking for more mental health and emotional health support from like the school psychology and chat counselors or therapists. Just wondering if during this time there's been more data in that area to give you some quantitative information about the need in that for students and families. One thing I did want to say is just thank you all for working so hard to make school open, even for the number of days that they're open for each kids. I know for my two kids, it's made a big difference. And I'm curious to the second parent's comment as to what are some of the feedback from teachers on how to reach kids who are, already in person. They don't raise their hands. So, when it's a virtual environment or distance environment, they tend to, just use the screen as a kind of a natural barrier to not be seen. So how do teachers connect to those kids? And I'm speaking a little personally from my own family because my sixth grader is a little bit more introverted, and so he has a hard time just engaging in that way. And we get feedback from teachers that he needs to ask questions, but he doesn't want to ask questions. So, and it's I think more difficult to even engage in the virtual or the distance learning. And then the last question I have actually is just understanding our grading the 1s to 4s, just as a parent trying to understand this, because as I was looking at the data while you're presenting, I wasn't sure if I should really pay attention to the percentage in mastery because that was term 1 data. So are we expecting students to be, like, where are we actually expecting students to be in the beginning of the school year? Because my understanding of this type of sort of assessment or grading is that by the end of the grade level, they should be at 4 or mastery for the skill sets that we want them to have learned. So if you can shed some light on that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Our next speaker is Katie Healey.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for taking my comment. I felt compelled to comment on a few topics. The first, I just would like to mention that this evening's session seems to be much more on the student data and summer school plans. And I think there's great interest in talking about the upcoming school year. So I would really encourage the board to think about a meeting where parents are able to engage with you when we discuss the upcoming school year, as opposed to lots and lots of data from this current school year, because I think this is really a hot topic for a lot of people. I also wanted to share that my family is also paying for tutoring services for both of my children for reading, writing, and math. And I think that this is pretty common within the district. So I'm not even sure that these metrics are particularly helpful. I also wanted to share a little insight as the parent of a first grader with the writing curriculum. I heard Sandra mention that, trying to get some color around why writing isn't working. And I would say that the expectation that a 6-year-old, in my case, would be able to write independently for 30 minutes every day, which is what he's being asked to do on topics like how-to books, persuasive essays, and to then step back and edit it is just so unrealistic. He has really come to absolutely despise the entire process and is really disengaging from it. So I think that it's not production, it's not volume, it's really just a tremendous lack of interest in it at this point because it's become such a standoff. And so I also wanted to comment that I agree with Brian's approach to this, which is like, we need to do what it takes to find solutions to things that require in-person. I think that this really is going to come down to the 6 foot distance rule before anybody can come back. So talks of vaccines and PPE and all this other stuff is so irrelevant as long as we can't accommodate children in classrooms 6 feet apart. So I'm certainly lobbying the state and the county, and I know other parents are too, but I really do feel like a study session, an actual interactive session with the parent community on the topic of next year should happen and happen sometime soon. So thank you for everything you're doing. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kate.
Our next speaker is Minati Shah.
Hi, this is Minati. First, I want to thank you for all the information you've shared. I have two concerns. One, I have seen, I have a 4th grader and a kinder in Covington. And for my 4th grader, I've seen his grades dip substantially compared from third grade to 4th grade. And he's really been struggling with online was terrible. Hybrid is a little bit better, but there's still constant struggle. He doesn't have a tutor right now because I spend a lot of time with him during the day. However, I've reached out to the teacher several times and several occasions seeking for help. There haven't been any solutions so far that have worked. And it's difficult for me to believe that I'm the only parent struggling with this so far. So I'm wondering if this has been discussed at a larger level to figure out solutions for kids that are actually struggling due to the whole virtual learning this year. Second, I've probably emailed this before and haven't got an answer. What is the justification for minimum days? Despite that 20% of the time on Wednesdays has already been taken for teacher collaboration and development, how do you justify still having minimum days on Thursdays when kids are only getting 2 days a week in person and then you cut that short? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Monica Kosinski.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, so this is Monica and Jakub. We're dialing in from Monica's phone. So we have a couple of, thank you first of all for this session. We have 2 kids in Springer. One is the 1st grader and the second is the 4th grader. And I'd like to counter some of the feedback as well as plus one, some of the feedback mentioned by the parents. So a couple of issues that we've noticed specifically with the 1st grader. First of all, we've noticed there's a lack of feedback regarding the progress that our 1st grader is making across a wide variety of the assignments that are being requested to be done. And it's not the same as an in-person class, even in the blended model. Second, I would second the same feedback that was mentioned regarding the writing assignments. Our 1st grader really hated that. You really can't expect somebody that is learning how to write to spend 30 minutes writing. And it really wasn't until my wife basically had to quit her job and focus solely on the home education and homeschooling for multiple months before joining the workforce part-time, that we were able to get things back on track. I would really also plus 100 the minimum days. I really don't see, or we really as a family don't see why the minimum days exist in a blended model with Wednesdays being the transition day. So that basically should be changed. And last but not least, the overall From our community and from the discussions that we're having across the community, the parents' involvement has increased substantially. Many people have quit their jobs in order to support their kids' development, or as you've heard today's on the call, they fired tutors if they couldn't afford quitting their jobs in order to survive this blended model or completely virtual model, in order for the kids not to degrade in their development, in the development of the curriculum and their progress in school. So the combination of all of that is really counter to what has been presented today.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rayleen Mcateer.
Hi, everybody. I would just like to agree with all the parent speakers so far that have spoken tonight. I don't want to go back over what they've all said, but I would share a lot of their opinions. I will definitely email the board tomorrow to give you my thoughts and suggestions about what's working and what's not working from my home. I have 3 kids at Springer. I know Sandra in particular has mentioned and has shown concern about the writing program. I would have a lot of thoughts on that. I concur exactly with what the other speakers have said. In my house, it's just not working. I emailed you about this last year as well. It's just, they're finding it really hard to write. It's turned them off. You know, there's just no interest in it, which is unfortunate. But like I said, I'll email the board tomorrow about that. One of my concerns, I think, you know, there's so many questions we could cover here, so many topics, and about getting back into the school, but this presentation was really comprehensive. It was really good to see the data, but it seemed to be very much focused from the teacher's perspective or from the district's perspective. At one stage at the beginning of the presentation, Sandra, you mentioned that there was parental involvement. I would love to hear what parental involvement. I know that I and many other families would love to get their input to see what's working and what's not working. So I suppose one of my questions is, do you plan to send out a survey to ask, if so, when? Just to get, because, you know, my kids are in blended right now, so they're 2 days at home and they're 2 days in school and 3 days at home in asynchronous. So we're very involved in their education this year. So I think it's important to ask for parents' thoughts on what's working and what's not working, so that we can get a truer picture of how it's all going. And I don't envy your job. It's a very difficult situation, but I think, you know, we have to work with this on this together this year, and I think it'd be really helpful if parents could have their say as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rayleen.
Our next speaker is Rachel Granger.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All of the information presented tonight, and of course for all the hard work that's gone into planning and executing this pretty extraordinary year. I know it's been a lot for everyone. There are a lot of things I agree with that have been said. I'm not going to go over that, but I will sort of give a big +1 to the previous commenters' call for parental survey. It's something I've been asking for since the first trimester. I've not heard back. My children, I have 2 children in virtual school, and I think, you know, there are probably things that, you know, could have been changed already that possibly could still be changed. But, you know, even as we think about next year, I think that the district would be better positioned in thinking about next year. To understand from parents who have, you know, I know I spend a ton of time. I also have tutors. I mean, I think we may be able to shed some light on some of the issues that you've seen, at least from our perspective, right? But not only things that are going poorly, things that are working really well that we may want to consider into next year. Like, you know, this year, you know, my oldest son, my 6th grader, has a lot of flexibility in showing what he knows at the end of sort of content units, right? And it has been extraordinary. And I've, and think, opportunities that play to his strength in ways that, he hasn't had in the past. And so, there are definitely things I think parents, as I said, can shed light on in terms of what's not working, but also in terms of maybe things we may want to hang on to as we go forward into the future. So I really strongly urge, you to please get a parent survey out there, not just on the mental health issues, on the range of issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, I don't see anyone else for public comment, so I'm going to close public comment now. Board members, I'm opening it up for discussion on this agenda item. Anybody want to start? Go ahead, Jessica.
I guess one of the first questions, just because a lot of people were asking, what is Thursday's minimum day for? Just so they understand. I do have an understanding of it, but I figure might as well have that question answered.
Sandra, you want to take that?
Sorry, I'm writing out my notes. So the minimum day Thursday is part of our calendared. We have 2 minimum days throughout each year, October and March. And this is a teacher directed minimum day. And most of our teachers will be working on their report cards, which allows them some dedicated time to provide some feedback and some progress monitoring for students in a dedicated space.
All right, and next question, and it's actually based on the theme of the last couple commenters. It's a question / feedback. I do think maybe we do get a parent survey out there to see how learning is going at home for our parents, and maybe questioning how many have tutors, et cetera, and mental health, et cetera. I know we can get some data from the LAF's survey, but I don't know if it's going to hit all the information we may need. And definitely, I want to emphasize to everybody on the call that we're going to have more of these meetings. This is just the first one. And this one was looking backwards, seeing how we had been doing and what we may have to think about for this summer. But it's really just the beginning of our discussion as it relates to next year. And then last, let me see. Amy Wang had actually asked about grading. My understanding about grading is it's not necessarily like you have a 4 at the end of the year, you have passed that grade. It's actually grading based on what they're learning at that time. So they may have gotten a 3 on a certain subject matter, but then gets a 4 or a 2 on the next subject matter. Is that correct? I'm sure you can go into better depth than I, but as a parent, I've been experiencing this.
Yep, you're right on, Jessica. It's about, math is a little bit easier to think about. It's a discrete unit that you're taught. And of course, there's always some alignment that goes through, but it's really about what were you taught and how well did you learn it, right? To what degree are you independent with it? And the same is true for other subjects. So you might see a 3 or a 4, 1 quarter, 1 trimester, and then that grade shifts. It's really focused on that terms studies.
And I think that's it for now. I want to just emphasize that we, and Jeff said this a couple times as you were presenting, we all are working towards 5 days a week as it becomes safe. We know that educating and teaching and kids learning, they do better in person. Some actually are thriving 100% at home, but generally most kids are going to do well in person. We are doing what we can with the resources we have and the guidelines we have, and we will continue to push and try to make it within the limits we are allowed. But there is only so far we can go. And I am been very impressed with what we can do, and that we are one of two districts. I think there are a couple more districts that have started opening up, but we've been one of two districts in our area that's been open since the beginning. You know, and so I've been really impressed, and I look forward to how we graduate as things get better with this pandemic, and just really was amazed with your presentation, Sandra. You know, as I went through thinking of questions, you nailed them I didn't have to ask my questions because you asked them and said, oh, we need to look at that. And I'm like, okay, check that. I don't have to say that. So just really great work for you and your team and all of our teachers. So thank you.
Brian?
So I just think the only thing, since I jumped the gun a little bit before, and I think I stated most of my comments, but just to add on based on the parent feedback, I mean, we need to be really careful that we're not complacent this year because it's such a special year, because things are happening. And we heard from parents who, you know, talk about how, like, from a data standpoint, they might look like their kids are doing fine, but really they're struggling in a lot of different ways behind the scenes. So I would like to see us, as we think about the spring and summer school, just make sure that we're casting the net as wide as possible to sort of figure out what the need is and what we can offer. I mean, it's always been district policy, right, that it should not require tutors to get to mastery.
Yep.
And you know, obviously different families take it into their own hands sometimes, but they shouldn't have to. And so if that's widespread, and I don't necessarily disbelieve that it is, then we need to sort of get on top of that and figure out what the off ramp is for those families.
Yep.
You know, hopefully, as everybody has said, 5 days a week in person is part of the off ramp for that. But you know, what else can we do either in the interim or as part of that? You know, and even just sort of ask. Traditionally, our summer school, right, is for socioeconomically disadvantaged, mostly students. But you know, again, I would like us to sort of cast the net a little wider this time and see if students who are nominally on grade level would be interested in coming in person for a month in the summer, because they didn't get to do that most of this year. So I think that's all I have.
I have a quick question, actually. It's just something that's been kind of the back of my mind. I know that we had a summer school before with the YMCA, and it was kind of like this fun thing. With the pandemic and how they're defining what camp is, what school is, you know, I want to make sure that we don't accidentally cross some sort of boundary and then we're like stuck under some other rules, you know. So you see what I'm trying to say? Like, if it's summer school, I mean, I know it should be fun and I know we want our kids back on campus, but I want to make sure that we're not labeled as camp.
Yep. No, we will be offering an academic summer program that will be really fun for kids. But yes, because this summer we are not working closely with the Y. It really will be underneath our guidelines. And, you know, like last year, the county, I think, Jeff, put out specific guidelines for summer schools and what have you. So I would expect a different set, perhaps, of guidelines as we get closer. I don't know if you've heard anything about that, Jeff.
Well, I haven't yet, but I assume I would guess that they are going to continue to update the regulations under the current categories. And there are, to Shelley's point, there are a certain set of regulations, health regulations and limits that are issued for camps and activities and so forth in the summer, right? Versus school offerings that happen to take place during the summer. And I think, Shelley, your point is you don't want us to unknowingly limit ourselves by treading into the camp world when that becomes a more limiting situation than we would otherwise have.
Exactly. Thank you. And I also just wanted to know, all of the waivers and all the stuff that we've applied for to keep our schools open, does that include summer school, or is it only for the academic year?
That's only for the academic year currently.
Okay.
I do. I will just say I do anticipate tomorrow that when the state releases their data, that Santa Clara County will be in the red for a second consecutive week. Just looking at 7-day rolling averages from County Public Health, and so that means on Wednesday we would, as a Santa Clara County, move into red tier, which has a number of implications other than schools, but for schools, that means that we'd be on course for our opening of junior high schools.
Okay. Vladimir?
Yeah, I just had just a couple of very small comments. The first one has to do with the survey. I think it's important to find out in the survey, you probably are on this already, but find out what percentage of parents are seeing the same kinds of issues that were reported tonight. I can imagine that out of 3,000 kids, you could have 1,500 that are having these kinds of issues, or perhaps it's only the 12 that or the 25 that were reported here. I think it's important that we understand what percentage or how big of a problem is it, I guess, and that's I think you would do that anyway, even if I didn't make the comment. The second thing is, I'd just say a word about writing. And I was thinking as Sandra was talking about this, writing, reading, and math. Writing, I think, is probably the intellectually most challenging one, because with math, it's, at least at this level, it's somewhat of a rote activity. With reading, again, you've got everything in front of you. It may be hard to read a word, put it together, make an understanding, but it's not as difficult as thinking of a sentence and putting the sentence down and doing something like that. And I can imagine that, I mean, I have more difficulty with writing, and I think most people have more difficulty with writing. So it's not surprising that some kids really have a problem with writing. I'm not sure that we should spend right now a lot of time on next year. And the reason is not that it's not important, it is important. But there's so many unknowns for next year about the level of the pandemic, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, that I think I would prefer us to spend time on what can we do now and this year to improve learning. And the last comment is, given our reliance on our stated multiple times reliance on following the science as presented by the Santa Clara County Health Board, I'm not sure that we could have opened sooner than we did. Possibly, but I think we've done as good a job as we possibly could in that. Thanks.
Thank you, Vladimir. Steve?
Sure. So I agree with most comments everybody else has made so far, so I'm not going to repeat those. I'm comfortable with where the conversation is headed. I do think the one thing that we don't want to lose sight of is the reason summer school participation went up so much was a full day program. So whatever we can do to make that a full day program, I don't want to call it a camp. But the ability for a family to drop their kid off in the morning and pick them up after work made a big difference. And that's why our attendance went up, and that's why our participation went up. So whatever we can do to maintain that idea of a full day. I like Brian's idea of extending it to more than just the traditional audience. Makes a lot of sense to me, given what we've had. Does it make sense, or do we have enough data to have someone from more the psychology side come in and talk about what they're seeing with kids? And is there any sort of feedback presentation we can see from them about how that's going? And I'm not sure that we have, I'm looking for aggregate data, obviously not individual data. I'm looking for a conversation about what we're seeing in our schools. Because anecdotally, we're hearing a lot of stress, we're hearing a lot of this, a lot of concern. Or what what are we seeing from the professionals that are seeing our kids that are in there, and can they help us understand what, A, what's going on, and B, what might be done about it over the summer. If it's not part of a school program, or there are other things we can do to be encouraging kids to learn how to react with or interact with kids again, if they're not allowed to do that a lot live. So just some thoughts there between now and summer would be helpful for us to understand that, if we can do that. And it's not my area of expertise. I'm the first to admit that. I'm the one who walks away from feelings more than anybody else. But what I want to do is make sure that we have the ability to address it as a group, so that there's ways for kids to move forward, so no one's getting left behind on that. And then finally, I think the only other thing, I brought it up earlier and I'll bring it up again, is that idea of individual reaching out to families that we think we're concerned about, and see what we can do to make them maybe approach learning a different for this last quarter, not just the summer, but for this last quarter as well. What can we do there? So those are my only things. Beyond what everybody else said, I agree with all that. So.
Thank you, Steve. I agree with what my fellow board members have said, so I don't have anything to add. I just wanted to amplify what Jessica said in that, I'll get to you, Brian. I just want to thank Sandra for her amazing presentation today. You know, I had taken notes to ask you questions on the data, and then you answered them in your analysis, which I thought was really great. You know, so thank you so much for that. I do appreciate parents wanting to talk about what's the next school year going to look like, but the whole point of tonight's study session was to see where we as a district and our kids are academically right now, and what we can do for the remainder of the school year and into the summer. So as Jessica said, we'll probably have more of these study sessions, so stay tuned. I'll punt it over to Brian. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had one more thought that occurred to me. And I think this is sort of an ask for Jeff, because there's been a real struggle with the county health department over the course of the year to try to get, unfortunately, they have not really provided a roadmap in terms of sort of when the guidance might change and how do we get back to full on-campus instruction. And as some of the parents, you know, in my conversations one-on-one with parents and personally, I'm sure other board members as well have been talking to the county health department and to our county representatives, and everybody trying to emphasize that the goal is to get back to full on-campus instruction. Help us understand how we do that. It might be helpful at either our next meeting or the one after, Jeff, if you can provide sort of an overview of what changes would be required to the county health guidance for us to get kids back on campus full time. Because I think that will help us advocate more effectively if we sort of understand exactly what the asks are that we would need. You know, as we've said all along, it's all based on the science, but there's always a layer of interpretation between the science and, you know, sometimes with Santa Clara County in particular, a lag in adjustments compared to some other counties. So, and we can have a further conversation offline, Jeff, if it would help to further explain what I have in mind, but I wanted to throw that out there.
Yep, I will talk to you.
Great. Any other comments? Then I just want to close by saying that I am super proud of our school district and our staff and our teachers and our parent community, all of us coming together. We have to keep in mind that this has been an extraordinary year. You know, in a couple of weeks, we're going to come up on the anniversary of when we went into lockdown and our world turned upside down, and we're doing our best to work in this sort of upside down inverted world. I'm glad that we're following public health guidelines. You know, it's the smart thing to do, obviously, and we've been doing it consistently, and it's worked out really, really well for us. And you know, of course, we want our kids back on campus 5 days a week, and we're working towards that goal. And very happy about that. And I also want to say that I'm really proud of our school district for being able to pivot so quickly as those guidelines keep changing. That really is a testament to the dedication and the professionalism of our district staff and our teachers. So thank you very much for the incredible amount of work you guys have done this year. And I know that you will continue to do. Okay, I think that's it. So I will adjourn this meeting. So thank you, and I'll see you all Monday night.
Have a good evening.
Take care, everyone.